Hey there, thanks for tuning in. You're watching Dirt Bike Channel. I'm your host, Kyle Brotherson. Today, I'm going to attempt to answer the question of whether or not you should be buying one of those EFI KTM 250s or 300s, or if you should go with the carbureted versions of those bikes. Stick around. I've been getting this question a ton over email, and the question goes something like this. Kyle, should I buy a carbureted KTM or should I wait and try to find one of the EFI bikes, those TPI bikes, like the one that I gave away last month? And this is really a tricky question, and it really kind of depends on what you want to get out of your riding and what you value the most and the types of places that you ride the most. So it's not a cut and dry answer. This is a technical question, and so I wanted to address it in a video. But I will say this, if you want just kind of a summary, if this is the too long didn't watch summary, here's my suggestion to you. A good deal on a carbureted bike is better than waiting for a possible deal, which will likely be more money, on an EFI bike. Now, why do I say that? I'll get into that kind of in the video, but just suffice it to say, for the summary part of this video, I wouldn't wait around too long for one of those EFI bikes if you've got a good deal on a carbureted bike. This bike right here behind me is a 2018 KTM 250XC. It has a carburetor, and I'm totally fine with that. Let me get into my first reasons. I'm gonna give you 6 or 7 reasons of kind of back and forth of the pros of the EFI, the pros of the carbureted bike. Let's get into those right now. Okay, so the pros of the EFI bike, the TPI bikes, the transfer port injection bikes. The pro is that those bikes run amazing and you don't have to tune them. You don't have to change out any jets or anything like that. They run unbelievably awesome from the factory. I haven't had the 300 bike. I'm trying to get the TPI 300 right now from a bunch of different dealers, and hopefully I'll be able to get one, even though with the knee, the ACL, I'm not going to be able to ride really until about November. The TPI bikes, the TPI bikes run absolutely incredible. So that's a pro for getting the TPI bike. On the other hand though, the carbureted bikes, they run really, really good as well, especially if you know how to tune a carburetor, if you know how to tinker with a jet here and there. It doesn't take me very long to tune a bike. In order to tune this bike, I spent about an hour. I mean, who doesn't have an hour? And honestly, I learned a ton about the carburetor when I'm tuning each bike, and I learned about the nuances of each bike. And so I jet my bike basically one time when I first get it, and I'm riding between 5,000 feet and 10,000 feet, and that whole range there of a mile of elevation, it doesn't run like distinctly worse enough in that mile of elevation change that I feel like I need to change anything. The only time I ever change it is if I'm going down in elevation, like if I'm going down to like 3,000 feet or something, then I'll enrich in my mixture a little bit. But that only happens to me a couple times a year. So I spend like an hour a year, jetting my bike. So it's not a big deal, the jetting thing. One of the knocks on the EFI bikes, those TPI bikes, is that they're gonna be harder to find. They're in super high demand, and we're not gonna get that many of them. Last year on the 2018 models, we got the KTM 250 XCW TPI, but in the US, we didn't get the 300 version. They kept that in Europe. This year on the 2019s, the US market is going to get both the 300 and the 250 version. But still, those bikes are in such high demand that it's going to be harder to get them. And the deals are not going to be as good on them. You're going to pay full retail or more on all those bikes because it's in such high demand. Compare that to the carbureted bike, and the carbureted bikes are going to be in less demand. They're going to be easier to find. And if you find, there's that old saying that a bird in the hand is worth 2 in the bush. So if you can get a good deal on a carbureted bike like I have, you might want to take that over the possible deal that may never come around on that 300 TPI or that 250 TPI, EFI bike. Another thing is those EFI bikes are going to be a little bit more expensive. So if you're on a budget, the EFI bike is going to be more expensive. You can find a better deal on the carbureted bike like I have behind me. Now that's not to say that there's not value in the EFI bikes, because there is. You know, it's the trade-off of not ever having to really jet the bike no matter what elevation you go to. But if you have, you know, some tools and $15–20, you can jet your EFI bike, and so you're going to be ahead as far as it goes in the money wise if you just get the carbureted model of one of these bikes. A pro for the EFI bike, the TPI bike, is that if you have major elevation changes all the time, like one time I'm talking to a guy who was living in Phoenix. At Phoenix, they're at like, you know, 1,000 feet above sea level, but he often rides up at Flagstaff. And at Flagstaff, it's like 8,000 feet, you know, 7,000, 8,000, 9,000, 10,000 feet. So here's a guy who one weekend he might be riding in the valley in Arizona at like 1,000 feet or 500 feet or 1,100 feet. And the next weekend he might be up at 8,000 feet. For that guy, the TPI bike is going to be a little bit better, because that bike is going to run. I mean, we're talking like sometimes even a 2-mile elevation change. He's not going to have to change anything if he gets the TPI bike as far as jetting and things like that. So for that guy, it's probably going to be maybe a better bet to get the EFI bike, because he's not going to have to be changing the jets every weekend. For me though, like I said, I tune my bikes. I live at about 5,000 feet, and I tune them to run at about 6,500 feet, somewhere right in there. And I don't have to change them between 6,000 feet and 10,000 feet. It just doesn't bother me that much. So jetting isn't as much of an issue to me. But I don't have those major 7, 8, 9,000, 10 feet elevation changes where it's going to bother me. A benefit of the TPI bike is that you're not going to be mixing any gas, so that's going to save you some time. There's an oil reservoir right up here in the frame, which you guys have probably seen, where you put your 2-stroke oil in there, and then the bike mixes it for you. They're doing that to get the best ratio at all times for like fuel, air, and oil ratio. So that's a really good thing, because you're not going to be mixing your gas. On the other hand, that does give a little bit more complexity. And the thing that I'm most worried about with the EFI bikes, the TPI bikes, is that oil pump. You have an oil pump right down here on the bike, and if that oil pump fails, you're gonna burn your bike up like that. So that's something we really don't know how long. I mean, in the manuals it says to replace that, I can't remember, like 60 or 80 hour intervals. So you're gonna wanna be changing that more often than you change the top end on your bike. Like I go, you know, 100, 120, 125, 130 hours on the top ends of my 2-strokes, because I'm not wrapping them out all the time. I'm not racing. I'm just doing trail riding and stuff like that. The type of riding I do, I don't think it's really mandatory to change your top end before 100 hours for sure. But that oil pump, you're going to have to change it pretty frequently, because if it ever fails, you're going to blow your bike up, you know. So that's one advantage of the carbureted bike, is you don't have that issue, because you're going to be changing your own oil. It's a little bit less complex that way. I mean, you're going to be mixing your own oil in your gas, so it's going to be less complex that way. Pro for those EFI bikes, the TPI bikes, is they are electrically smooth. They are unbelievable. They just run so well that they just kind of feel like they're electric. On the other hand though, the carbureted bikes, they feel, at least the ones that I've been around, they feel like they have a little bit more hit, like a little bit more low end grunt. And I think that's because they run a little bit richer down on the low end. So I mean, if you want the ultimate ability to be able to tune your bike and make it rich on the low end so it'll lug and gut it out through some of the slow technical stuff, you might be better off right now with the carbureted editions of these bikes, because you have that flexibility easily to put the right jets in your carburetor to run it a little bit richer and give it more of that tractor-like feel on the bottom end. You know, KTM touts the fuel economy on these TPI bike, or not this, but on their TPI bikes, saying it's, you know, this 30% improved, you know, fuel efficiency. On the 2 bikes that I have tested, the 2 EFI bikes, I have not seen a 30% fuel efficiency increase. Maybe there was a little bit of an increase there, but I think most of that was due to the fact that it doesn't have overflow vent tubes out of the carburetor, where it's not dumping it out on the ground. So I think the fuel economy is marginally better. It's not that much. So on the carbureted bikes, I can just say you're not really giving up that much. Either way you go, you can't really make a wrong decision. At least on the TPI bikes here in the US, you're going to have the Explorer 48 fork, which I think is a fantastic fork. It works really, really well for single track, and I don't think it does anything wrong. On the other hand, on the XC bikes, you're gonna be, the XC carbureted bikes, you're gonna be getting the air fork, which I think is a really, really versatile fork. It may not be quite as good at picking up the chop for like single track and stuff like that, but overall, it may be a little bit easier to use because you can like put higher pressure for one day and lower pressure from the other day, so it's kind of like adjusting the spring rates. Ultimately for me, I have the XC bike because I like the gearing better on that bike, and this is just the bike that I ended up with because it's hard to find those fuel injected bikes. I'm desperately trying to find a 300 TPI bike that I can review later this year when I get the knee back, when I'm rehabbed back in November. But just suffice it to say, you can't really make a wrong decision on this. I hope that this has helped you a little bit with some pros and cons of both. Ultimately, it's just going to come down to what type of riding you like to do best. If you like the really nasty technical stuff, you're going to probably gravitate more towards a 300. And if you're the type of guy that doesn't want to do all the jetting and mess around with jettings, you're naturally going to gravitate towards that TPI bike. Where if you're a guy that has a little bit more wide open spaces, you're going to gravitate more towards maybe a 250. And if you're the guy that wants to tinker around a little bit with carburetors and have the ability to tune it in your shop without having to buy a computer, you're probably going to end up with a carbureted version. I will say that the future is the electronic fuel injection, the transfer port injection. That's where the future is. I don't know how long it's going to be, but my guess is within 4 or 5 years, you're not going to be able to get a bike with a carburetor on it anymore. Everything will be fuel injected. So that's kind of where things are moving, but that doesn't mean that you have to jump on the bandwagon right now. It doesn't mean that the carbureted bikes are obsolete. This bike is not obsolete. This bike is still cutting edge. The EFI bikes are just maybe a little bit more on that cutting edge. So if you want to be an early adopter, go ahead and get the EFI bike, the TPI. So anyway, hopefully this video has been helpful. If you like what we're doing, please remember to subscribe to the channel, like these videos, follow us on Facebook and Instagram, support us on Patreon if you want to do that, if you want to be so kind, and stay tuned to the channel because sometimes we're doing dirt bike giveaways where you can win a dirt bike for the price of a t-shirt or a hat or something else like that. So we're always trying to do cool things. And that's pretty much it, guys. So until next time, thanks for watching.